Hi, I'm James McGuire, and today we're talking about how organizations can accelerate their use of data. We'll discuss some of the problems that executives run into in terms of optimizing their data. More importantly, we'll look at what it takes to create a successful data-driven culture. To discuss all that, I'm joined by three major thought leaders. With me is Miles Sewer, Principal Data Product Marketing Manager at Dell Boomi, as well as a CIO chat facilitator and a Data Mission contributor. Miles, you really get around.
I try.
Also with us is Randy Bean, Chief Executive Officer of New Vantage Partners. Hello to you, Randy.
Hello. Pleasure being
And
here.
good to have you with us today. Rounding out our panel is Dan Kirsch, Managing Director of Hurwitz and Associates. Hello to you, Dan.
Hello, glad to be here.
And Dan, you tell us that yesterday you had your second vaccine shot. So if you're feeling under the weather, we do understand that.
I can blame anything dumb I say on that.
Absolutely, you've got the vaccine excuse. So I think when we talk about data analytics, there's a certain tension sometimes in terms of a lot of staff and even executives want to use good old-fashioned gut instinct, common sense, as opposed to using the numbers and the metrics and the results of data analytics. And so those two things are often in conflict. How can executives say, hey, people, we need to be using the results of the data analytics. We're not going to run the business by the seat of our pants anymore. How can executives guide that process? Miles, your sense of that?
It's interesting. I really like what happened at Target. So Target, as you know, had a massive breach, and then they hired Brian Cornell. And Brian Cornell is a data guy. And so it does start at the top. I mean, the board said, we need somebody who understands data. And it was funny because one of the stories that came out of him early was not only did he want the data, but he wanted to understand the meaning of the data. So he went into Target stores and did impromptu focus groups to ask women why it was on baby food that he was interested in, but why did they want more natural baby, what was going on kind of thing. And then he responded. So, what we really, if we're going to drive a data-driven culture, it does start at the top. The CIO can help, and we talk a lot about that in CIO chat, but they need the ammunition and the organization pooling for data.
It's interesting that he would actually go into the Target store and speak to customers. That's a little anecdotal, unless he's going to talk to like 5,000 customers. Was he not somehow using an anecdotal representation of data as opposed to a large metric study there?
Well, no, he was just trying to understand the meaning behind the data. What was driving them to be motivated? He knew what the numbers were, but he wanted to know why was this push happening? So, a data center is going to ask, the questions behind the data, and that's going to oftentimes be qualitative.
Right. Randy, what do you see in terms of when executives look at staff at all levels of the organization using instinct or sort of like the seat of the pants wisdom as opposed to the numbers? How can executives direct them to say, hey, let's use the analytics?
Yeah, and let me give a little bit longer response in terms of an additional fuller introduction, which will establish some context. So for the past decade, I've been doing a lot of writing. In 2014, 2015, I did a monthly column in the Wall Street Journal on big data and its application within industry. And I've been subsequently doing that for the past 7 years in Forbes. In addition, regularly contribute to Harvard Business Review and MIT Sloan Review. So doing a series of case studies for both of those publications in terms of what organizations are doing. Two more things, and then I'll get right to your answer. Sure. And I've pulled a lot of this thinking together in actually a book that's coming out in August from Wiley called Fail Fast, Learn Faster, Lessons in Data-Driven Leadership in an Age of Disruption, Big Data, and AI. And a lot of the context of that book comes from our experience seeing that the challenges and struggles that organizations are going through to be successful in the use of data. And one of the things that we do is each year for the past decade have been doing a survey of senior C executives from Fortune 1000 companies. And I just want to share some of these numbers with you because I think it's kind of poignant in a way. So we asked this question about what is the state of your data and AI initiatives? And we asked 6 questions. Are you driving innovation with data? 48% said yes, the majority said no. Are you competing on data and analytics? 41% said yes, the remainder, roughly 60%, said no. Are you managing data as a business asset? 39% said yes, the other 61% said no. Have you generated transformational business outcomes? 29.2% said yes, the other 70-odd% said no. Have you forged a data culture? Only 24.4% said yes, 3/4 said no. And have you created a data-driven organization? Only 24% said yes. So what that points out is that in spite of all of the massive investments and all of the commitment and the establishment of roles like the chief data officers, there's still many struggles ahead for organizations. It's a challenge. It's a journey that takes place over time. And I can add more specifics as we go along.
Oh, I guess the one follow-up I would say is that those numbers are actually pretty low, almost dismal if companies are hoping to create a data-driven culture. Why do you think, I know it's a big answer really, but if you put this in a nutshell, why do you think here in the year 2020 or 2021, depending on when the survey was done, why is it still so slow? Or why is still data analytics still in its infancy in many ways?
Yeah, I could speak for days on that, but let me give the most succinct answer I can. One of the questions in the survey, and we make this binary, we said, what is the biggest impediment or obstacle to your organization becoming data-driven? Is it related to technology or is it related to cultural issues, meaning organizational alignment, communication, business processes? And roughly 90% say that it relates to cultural issues, not technology. So I sometimes describe it to people as I go into Fortune 1000 companies and meet with the data folks, and they tell me about the robust capabilities that they've created, which are very nice and impressive. And I meet with the technology folks and they talk about the architectures that they've created that are robust and impressive. Then I meet with the line of business CEO and they say, we don't have confidence in the data. We don't trust the information that we're receiving. We don't get the information that we need and the timeliness that we have it. So there's a big gap to be resolved between the capabilities and the needs of the business to make sure that the data is aligning with specific use cases and key business questions.
Okay. There's a real disconnect there. Dan, what would you add in terms of that tension between gut instinct versus data analytics? I mean, how can companies move forward in the world of data analytics?
Yeah, I guess I'll mention a book that I co-authored, I guess at the end of 2019, and it recently came out in a paperback called Augmented Intelligence, The Business Power of Human-Machine Collaboration. And so what we really see is, there's a few tasks that you can really just automate. So one area is around operations, for instance. Is the server up? Is it down? What's the temperature of it? There failover. A lot of that can be automated. But where we see the most value is where machine intelligence or analytics works alongside humans. So one example, for instance, is Stitch Fix. So they've been they've succeeded. A number of fashion retailers got rid of all of their designers and said, we're just going to use AI. We're going to know what the fashion trend is next year, next quarter, and we're going to design for that. And one of those companies failed, went bankrupt during the pandemic last year. And Stitch Fix, the way that it works is they have individual consultants that work with customers. It's analytics based, but then there's things that the analytics can't capture. Is the person working from home? Do they have a new job? Is their eye color a little different? The analytics say if you have green eyes, maybe green really makes it pop, but this person really hates green. So there's things that the human can understand that the data doesn't. On the other hand, a human can never analyze massive amounts of data. You just can't understand it. I mean, I was looking at a spreadsheet yesterday with 35,000 lines. I mean, I can't make heads or tails of that, but a machine, instantaneously can make sense of it. So that's where we see the most value is the collaboration of the two. And it also removes some of the fear of just, employees are always nervous. Am I just going to be automated out of a job?
Right. Right. I mean, it seems like there's things that the machines are good at and things that the humans are good at, and if the humans could sort of mine a little bit more of that machine wisdom, we might be in better shape. What about the idea of established processes getting in the way of being good at data? Like there's a routine there, there's a system, there's an element of the architecture that really slows things down. What about concepts like DevOps and how can that accelerate, the use of data analytics? Randy, what might you add about that?
I mean, I just say that I focus mostly on the cultural aspects, and data represents change, and it can create fear in the same way that in the past and maybe in the present technology creates fear, because it means that organizations potentially have to change how they're operating. It has an impact on individuals in terms of how they do their jobs. So any switch to new architectural approaches or new business processes represents change to an organization that can create uncertainty and that can create fear. And unless individuals within a company at all levels see what is the benefit to them, there can be a reluctance to embrace some of these new capabilities.
So in other words, the humans are a little afraid of the numbers.
Well, yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I guess you could call it superstition in a way, but the idea that you may have preconceived notions about how to do business or who your best customers are, and sometimes the numbers can change the established orthodoxy, and sometimes that's how organizations are structured based upon certain assumptions. And I mean, you look at professional sports, before the Moneyball effect, there were certain assumptions about who are the most valuable players and what you did when you got up at the plate or went on the field or court in certain situations, and then the numbers suggested otherwise. So the same thing in business. Just because something's been done a certain way in the past doesn't mean that that's the most high percentage way to do things in the future.
Right. Miles, what would you say in terms of established processes and doing things the way they've always been done in the past versus moving data analytics forward? How can executives accelerate that process?
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've heard the Peter Drucker quote from the CIOs about how strategy is eaten for breakfast kind of a thing. It is amazing.
Tell me the quote if you would. Could you? I think I may need the quote. Could you lay out the quote for me?
Yeah, you're going to ask me to remember it exactly. It's something like
yeah. No. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I can tell you because I actually use it in my book. It's called
okay.
Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast.
That's it. That's exactly it.
Okay. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. All right. It's sort of like Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get hit in the face.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. But Miles, I'm sorry. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, that's fine. That's where I was going. I was just wanting to make it click. And
yeah.
So, no, but it is true. I mean, the established process, oftentimes this change, as we said earlier, can affect people. One thing was fascinated about a few years ago that'll fit nicely with some of the things Randy's been saying, is that a few years ago I got to interview CFOs on two different things. And one of the things I found out is that CFOs really want to be strategic. They don't want to be bean counters anymore. They want to be truly strategic advisors to folks.
Right.
But they spend so much of their time on quarter close. So I asked them, well, how does that work? And they said, well, we take all of the data out of ERP and we put it into spreadsheets, and then we start doing quality checks on the data. And he said, so you're doing manual data quality. Why are you doing that? There's tools to help you automate this. Yeah, but we don't trust it if IT controls the data quality. We have to control it. And I said, well, what if we could give you the knobs? You could say, as long as it's like this, it's acceptable. And if it's not, then do it. So it was fascinating. Here's a group of people who want to be strategic, the CEO. They want to be advising depending upon how the ups and downs are trending and what they do. But if they're stuck in a sand trap in the back, just doing the quarter close, they can't do it. So, we have to get better process. I do like the notion of bringing DevOps notions about, how do you run process and how do you continuously improve your data processes? They're not static, always do better at them. But process can really get in the way of succeeding.
Do you have a sense of where we are with DevOps and accelerated data? Is that really mainstream, or is that still like we want it to work, but it hasn't fully reached mainstream yet?
Some of the analyst community, I'll say it that way, not to offend Dan, some of the analyst
Okay.
community talking about this notion of data ops, which is
Right.
thinks about all of the elements together. And so, you know, as an accelerant, that you don't just throw a tool in to a customer, you actually provide them with to run their process better. And I think in a way, I mean, I know, Randy, this isn't what you do day to day, but I think that's a lot of what your company probably spends time with people. And how do you create great data processes?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Dan, have we had you weigh in on the idea of established processes versus data analytics? What are
Yeah,
your
or
thoughts on that?
going back to
Yeah.
DevOps and, you know,
Yeah.
DevSecOps, which is the hot one, and how many more things can you add to that?
Right.
There's a bit of a fallacy. I mean, you can't have someone who does bug checking, development, planning, operations. You can't know all of that. But also, there's different tool sets within each of those within each of those functions. So what we've seen is some companies starting to try and normalize all of that data. So how can the operations team understand the development data? They're not using those open source development tools every day. They don't understand the output. So how can you to be able to collaborate, you have to be looking at the same data set. So whether that's, you know, data definitions, but even just, you know, the development team isn't going to understand operations data. I mean, security is a whole other world. And then we're seeing some companies trying to even get, you know, marketing in on the process, or customer success managers. So if you're a customer success manager and you're talking to a customer that wants, you know, a certain feature, rather than saying, let me send 17 emails and try and find out how that's being developed. If there's a way of seeing, okay, they're doing some debugging with that feature request, we're hoping to get it out in 2 weeks. That empowers everyone to be looking at the same types of data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Same with marketing, for instance, they know something's coming in the pipeline and they can start planning.
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of the problem is we have to agree, you know, what data is real, and oddly enough, it seems to even go throughout the culture right now. We're having a hard time as a culture agreeing on certain facts. What is a fact and what is not. So maybe it makes sense the companies themselves have some disagreement about the data, whether or not to trust it. That's a big question that perhaps we might not fully answer today. Historically, chief data officers and CIOs needed to build their data platform, and that could take years. In fact, it may never be fully finished. How does a holistic data fabric help accelerate the time frame to being ready for analytics and data modeling? And that's a big question indeed. Miles, care to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this concept of data fabric or data platform, however you want to define it, is an interesting one. I think the idea here is that the days of putting together a bunch of point solutions and then trying to assemble it and make it all work together take too long. And so the notion of having a single platform that works together is something that people should be aspiring to in terms of enabling organizations to move faster. I mean, it was interesting. I had this discussion with Jeannie Ross a while back on her research, and she was telling me that 51% of organizations are still in silos. 21% are. I had to ask her what the 21% was. 21% are in duct tape and Band-Aids, and then 28% have gotten their data act together.
Right.
And so for the have-nots, you know, how do I get, you know, they're faster? I don't have 10 years, and the life of the public company is getting shorter and shorter. So I don't have 10 years to go put it together like I may have had 10 years ago. So that to me is what's attractive in this notion, but I'd love to hear what others have to say.
Dan, what would you say? How does a holistic data fabric help accelerate the use of data? And is there such a thing as a holistic data fabric, given that the most data fabrics and or data platforms are sort of ad hoc things that are in process, but can that solve our problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing an emergence of data fabrics, and think one of the most important things of a data fabric is it overcomes some of the hesitancies of data lakes, which often became data swamps. Because
what is the problem with data, before we leave that one, what is the problem with data lakes usually?
well, you're just dumping your data in there, so you have huge storage costs, huge data movement costs. Each team is no longer, they're taking their data that's well curated, that they've been responsible for decades, and they're just putting in the data lake. It could be a quarter old data. I mean, so who's making sure it's accurate? Who's making sure it's up to date? Who's managing the data lake? And so, whereas a data fabric, each team, the way we see a data fabric is it can extend over multiple clouds, multiple SaaS applications, and data can be analyzed where it is. So, for instance, the sales team can use Salesforce. They don't have to move their data out of Salesforce. And so you don't have the security problems of moving your data. You don't have the costs. Building a data fabric, we're still at the emergence of a data fabric, but I think in this multi-cloud world, it's a very significant concept.
You mean it resembles a utopian dream, but maybe it's on the way.
Well, I mean, we were told Hadoop was going to solve every problem.
I remember Hadoop, yeah.
So I think this, from a security perspective, compliance, cost, data fabric can really help. And also, I think the idea, multi-cloud is driving a lot of data fabric. Is no one has all of their data in a on-prem database.
Randy, what would you add? I mean, is the holistic data fabric the answer to our problems?
Well, I'd say that's kind of funny because, work with a range of Fortune 1000 organizations, and I'm only first starting to hear the term data fabric. So when Miles reached out, I had to laugh. And I said, I'm happy to join and learn all about data fabrics, because our clients are just starting to hear the terminology, and they're saying, what does data fabric mean, and how can that be used to transform our organizations, and where does it fit in terms of the concepts of modern data architecture? So, we bring in more of our architecture and engineering folks to speak to those issues. So I'd say, data fabrics and data literacy are probably the two buzz terms that hear the most these days, but often there's a gap between when you start to hear about these terms and the readiness of organizations to start investing in initiatives of that kind. I will say just briefly that, just for a moment, the title of the book, Fail Fast, Learn Faster, it's all about organizations need to try things, and they need to learn from experience, and they can't wait for the perfect solution, and it's better to be headed in a directionally correct path than to wait for the perfect environment. And so many organizations that we see are very reluctant to take steps and to invest and make commitments until they think everything is perfect.
Right, and that simply won't happen. Excuse me. It's interesting to look at the future in terms of Randy, the statistics you cited earlier, and how we're still very much working toward a data-driven culture, that we're not there yet. I mean, if we look 5 years in the future, certainly those companies that are more data-driven are going to have a major competitive advantage over the ones that are running by the seat of their pants. And so as each year goes on, it's like the competitive advantage gets greater and greater. I'm not sure what my question is. I just think it's like, there's only one way to do it, sadly or happily, whatever the thing is. We must be running it by data. I mean, here's my question. I've discovered my question. If you look to the future, if you look to the future of data analytics and companies really really grabbing on and using data analytics, what do you see? Say 3 years out, 5 years out, Dan? What is the future of companies actually truly using data analytics?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges, I mean, we've been writing about it for years, but still challenge is data quality. So, I mean, there's no company that doesn't have data. They all have tons of data.
Right.
But is it any good? Yeah, I mean, you saw a number of grocery stores bought by private equity, and one of the first things they did was get rid of the customer loyalty cards, because no one filled out all the information. You can do market basket analysis using the cash registers anyway. So just they just got rid of them because it wasn't bringing value. It gave them tons of data, and I'm sure some companies sold them on the fact that, oh, you're going to be able to understand every customer, but it's really about data quality, and then good data quality leads to high veracity in your analytics. I mean, if you can't, I mean, that goes back to the beginning question: how do you get teams to trust the analytics and not go by the seat of their pants? They have to trust the analytics has to be accurate.
Why do you, and we talked about this, but I think it's still worth looking at. Why do you think there is such a distrust of the data? What is the core problem there?
I mean, for a lot of people, it's understanding the analytics process. So, I mean, I think the concept of the citizen data scientist is sort of going by the wayside. I mean, you're not going to get, everyone in your organization isn't going to be running machine learning algorithms and doing things like that. People need to be data literate. They need to understand what someone on their team is doing. But trusting the data, trusting the output, having explainability, I think is an emergent. There's tons of research and investments going into explainability, because right now the only machine learning algo that has full explainability is a decision tree. I mean, no one knows how a neural network works. Even the greatest PhDs, they don't know. It works maybe, but they can't. I mean, I was talking to a data scientist. He uses a decision tree to present to the board what their plan is. They send out millions of dollars of direct mail. Then he uses deep learning algorithm because he gets an uplift, but he doesn't bring that to the board because they're not going to understand what it is, and he can't explain it. So a lot of it is going to be with explainability also.
Miles, what do you see when you look, say, 3 to 5 years in the future? Will we be completely data driven by then, or will the tension remain? And what will be a milestone, perhaps?
Well, I think we're going to see more of it. I do think that we're starting to see change happening. I mean, my friend Vijay Garbaksani at UC Irvine's Digital Transformation Center talks a lot about a company named McLaren. McLaren was a race car company, but they realized that they needed to get good at real-time data, so they got really good at real-time streaming data. And now they took the car out of the name, and they're actually partially a pharma company because the pharma companies weren't really good at data. Pharma companies were the worst at data, by the way, just because each group didn't want the other group to know what research they were doing. So they made up
silos,
names that made no sense. So you couldn't see. So it's like 5 to 10% of research that's gone on in drugs has been done before. They just don't know it to the other group.
Wow. Okay.
So I think we're going to get better at data because the market's going to. I mean, again, I think we're at 9 years, 10 years for a public company on average for lifespan. The ones who aren't good at data are going to be gone, and the ones that are good at data will replace them. I think we're at that. But love to hear what Randy has to say. Do you think we're at the moment now where people are realizing how important this is?
Please.
Well, I'd say I jotted down 5 points. So I'd say data is the future.
Data points, Randy.
Yeah, exactly. I firmly believe data is the future, which is good news for all data professionals. Data continues to proliferate in many forms, so it's becoming omnipresent. I think the past year in the COVID epidemic, it raised the awareness in the public of the value of data. People are trying to look at the data every which way to figure out what their risk factors were. And then to Miles' point about the pharmaceutical companies, they, for the first time, had to share information so that they could develop drugs and with greater efficacy. At the same time, I'd say that there's no easy answers, no magic bullets, and the companies have been at this, I've been in this space for a generation. And when I first started my career, I went to work for a major bank, and I worked in the technology group, and they had this, I was responsible for this file of information on customers, call it customer history. And I said, what do you do with this? And they said, well, the regulators make us put it in the vault for 7 years and then we're allowed to destroy it. And I said, wow, you know, to be mining this,
Great.
not locking it away and destroying it. So, you know, we've been at this for the better part of a generation, and I think it will continue. You know, you look at the rise to prominence of the role of chief data officer, but with a number of companies, they're now on their 4th or 5th or 6th iteration of people in that role, even over the course of the past decade. So a lot of opportunity, a lot of growth, but still a lot of work to be done, and it won't happen overnight.
What's the reason for the high turnover in the CDO position?
Expectations. The expectations are both so high and so wide and disparate. Also, it's a completely new role, so it's a very nascent thing. Some organizations have been looking for external change agents to come in, but often those individuals, though they know some of the best practices across a range of companies, they don't know the culture of that organization, so they step on toes or break glass and they lose credibility. And then often the organizations turn to internal folks, but those internal folks suffer the opposite problem. They're too afraid to rustle feathers and to push the organization forward. So it's been this pendulum going back and forth. But I think that over time, organizations are getting better. They are making progress. I think actually the statistics that I cited at the outset about lack of data culture, lack of being data driven, those numbers have gone down over the past 5 years, but I view that as a positive sign. I view it not so much that the numbers have gone down as organizations become more realistic. I think in the past, organizations said, oh, we have a data culture, we're data driven. And once they actually became better at using data, they realized that they, you know, sometimes it's like the analogy that you don't know how good or bad you are until you really get good at something. Like if you get really good at something, you realize like how far you need to go to become better. And the last point I'd make here by way of example is people often ask me, who are the best companies in terms of being data driven? And I speak about some of the companies that I've worked with, Capital One and banking and American Express and credit cards, but they're the most uncertain in terms of they're never comfortable. It's never good enough. They're always worrying about what other people are doing. And when I go into an organization, they say, we got it all figured out. That sets off alarm bells for me. You know, usually it's the ones that say, what can we be doing to be better, that you know, are the most successful and are the furthest along.
Yeah, interesting how that works. Well, I really thank the three of you. I think this could be, we could continue to speak for hours to be sure. This is a very big topic, but I think we should call it a day. Dan, Miles, Randy, totally appreciate you sharing your expertise today. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
James.
All right, bye-bye.